Before we get started with the podcast, I do need to would like to point out a couple of things about this episode. One, our guest podcaster, who you'll meet in a moment, his mic is kind of quiet, so you may want to use headphones, especially for this episode. Also, I apologize, my mic echoes a little bit at one point during the episode. And finally, please stay to the end for the outro. I'll be asking questions about and for feedback about this episode and about the channel in general. And I'll probably use that time to answer questions if you guys have any. Enjoy the show. Alright, we're back with episode 2 of the 3&D podcast. In between the first episode and this recording, we came up with a name, a little branding. I'm here again, Justin Genus, with Brendan Murphy and Zachary Genus. And we have a special guest podcaster with us for our NBA free agency preview episode, Jake Nackman. So Jake Nackman, what's your favorite team and who is your favorite player of all time?
My favorite team is the Charlotte Hornets. My favorite player of all time is Kemba Walker.
What? Why?
I kind of like the way he plays.
No, I mean, why Charlotte?
I like the way he plays.
That's Kemba Walker plays for Charlotte.
So one of the most exciting parts of the NBA season, ironically, is the off season. Probably more exciting than the finals these past 2 years. And with so many big names being ready to move, being willing or at least threatening to move spots each year, the NBA off season has become by far the most watched off season of any sport. And this year, we probably have the biggest one since the biggest free agency since LeBron was last a free agent.
Since Jordan signed with the Wizards.
Yeah, that's probably bigger. But besides that, I'd say that this might be the biggest free agency decision we've ever seen a player have to make, with all the mobility that's available to players these days. So, on that note, here we've got our hoops hype top free agent list, and we're gonna go through some of the biggest stars and then maybe some of the most intriguing players. So first question here, Durant's ranked number 1 on Hoops Hype's list, but let's be honest, we all know who the best player in the league is, and we also know that Durant is not going anywhere anytime soon. So probably the most important domino that's gonna fall, maybe besides a potential Kawhi trade, is LeBron. So where do you guys think, two-part question here, where do you guys think would be the best destination for LeBron's legacy, and where do you think would be the best fit for him as a player? Let's start with you, Brendan.
Honestly, for his legacy, I think you have to stay in Cleveland unless you think you're going to win elsewhere, which obviously in this situation we do think would happen. So I think you move to an LA with a co-partner in Paul George or Kawhi Leonard, or honestly, go somewhere even better with the chance to winning, like Houston or whatever. Although the problem with Houston is it really doesn't take into account his family. He clearly doesn't love Houston in comparison to the Miamis and LAs of the world. But he did live in Cleveland, even though it was his hometown, so it's a possibility. I think the best move for him, though, would just to stay in Cleveland. It's looking more and more like Paul George is just going to stay in OKC. And I think if you wait a year, finish out your contract, take your player option in Cleveland, you're going to be able to really make a better offseason move next year. And I think he's going to still have gas in the tank. He hasn't showed any signs of slowing down yet. So I think he stays in Cleveland if he really wants to do the best move for his career.
I think Brendan made some good points, and I actually agree with a lot of them. I think the best thing for LeBron's career and his legacy would be to stay in Cleveland, but obviously LeBron's a family man. He's he's been saying he's going to consider his family. I don't know what his kids want. I don't know what his wife wants, but I just think we have to keep in mind that that's going to play a role in his decision, and a very large one at that. So we'll see what happens.
I I don't know. Why do you guys think that being in Cleveland is the best for his legacy? Exactly.
I think, the longer you stay in one place, I mean, it looks good. But, I mean, legacy in this case means championships. So if he can really put together a good roster and say LA, that's the right move for his legacy. It's just right now I don't think LA is going to be built until next offseason.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's that's a plausible way of thinking, but to me, you go to why staying? I guess staying in Cleveland makes sense for the year to see what goes down with Kawhi, but at the same time, you don't want something to happen with Paul George. That Thunder team was moments away from clicking at times, and if LeBron wants to win, Cleveland, it's not going to happen in Cleveland. So as far as I'm concerned, even if he goes to LA without Paul George, and he has to take a year, I'd rather spend that year being able to control, sort of manipulate Los Angeles's front office and get Paul George and try and entice Paul George from now, because if that
Kevin Love still exists, though. And I think Kevin Love is better than any piece on the Lakers. So
he exists at the three-point line and somewhere and on offense and defense, unfortunately. And whenever he's at the three-point line on defense,
he would still be the best player on the Lakers if he went to the Lakers.
Yeah, that's true. But if LeBron signs first, I think it pretty much locks in Paul George in LA. And
another thing to say is maybe it could be a Mexican standoff. Maybe nobody ends up signing in LA because they're waiting for the other person.
That's true. It's possible. What could you explain? I gotta ask you later what the difference between Mexican standoff and other kinds are. But what do you think, Jake?
I feel like if he stays in Cleveland, the best case scenario is just more finals losses. So I don't think that Cleveland is the place for him if he wants to improve on his legacy, and I think that he should go to the Lakers because I feel like they have the best chance to build a team with around him that can compete for multiple championships. And also, if he goes to the West, at least you won't basically if you get to the finals in the West, you're probably gonna win the finals, so he won't have to really worry about getting any more finals losses.
Good point.
That's an interesting point, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's already proven he can go to the finals. Everybody knows, and at a certain point, it becomes
it's better to lose before the finals instead of losing in the finals, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
I feel like that'll change once his career is over, but it does get a little redundant, proving I can carry a team to the finals over and over and over. And I do think he has any team he's on has legitimate chance at beating even a fully healthy Celtics team. Probably the next most important player who truly controls his destiny right now is Paul George, and obviously his decision is very, very much implicated with LeBron's. I think we pretty much covered his two most likely options: either player option, re-sign with the Thunder to see if that clicks again. If that clicks, and the Thunder would have to find the money to buy out Paul George or Carmelo Anthony for it to click. I think we all agree. But what do you guys think would be, if you were Paul George, what do you think would be the best move for him just as far as basketball reasons? Where would he fit the most right now without any other serious moves made?
I think
You keep thinking. What do you think, Brendan? I think it's going to be the Thunder. In my opinion, the Thunder is the best choice. To me, I'm not the biggest Westbrook fan or Westbrook hater. I'm kind of in the middle. I think he's a great player. I think he's second best point guard in the league, and I think he's up there. But I still think even with Westbrook being the ball dominant player that he is, that Paul George's best fit is there. I've been a long time criticizer of the fact that Paul George actually had one of his worst seasons in my eyes, maybe not statistically in my eyes, with the Thunder last year. But I still think that's the best place for him to be. Obviously, if LeBron's in LA, I mean, you can't beat being with LeBron. But I think that being with the Thunder, and we forget about Steven Adams, the fact that he's really the big three of that group. He's a great rising young center, and I think that really is the best place for him for one more year until LeBron goes to LA for almost positive next season.
Yeah, it's quite the possibility that he along with LeBron just waits out the market to try and get a feel for what other players want to do. And again, this whole Kawhi mystery has thrown a monkey wrench, I think, into a lot of players' plans. You done thinking now, Zach?
No, sorry, Dad had come to talk to me so I had to mute myself before. Like, he came in right as I started to answer.
Good to know. How about so? What you got, Jake?
I think that a really good fit for Paul George would be the Jazz. They were
It's
able
unique.
to. I think they overachieved this season. Definitely, most people thought they weren't going to make the playoffs, and they did pretty good in the playoffs, and they had a really
Did you
good
see the
coach.
Thunder overachieve?
No, he said the Jazz. The Jazz.
Oh,
I meant I think I'm trying to say the Jazz.
Yeah, go
They
on.
got one of the best rookies, one of the best coaches, the defensive player of the year, and I think adding Paul George would just elevate, or it would be a good situation for Paul George and the Jazz.
That's a not an opinion you're gonna hear on ESPN or anything. I've never this is the first time I've actually heard that suggested. I do think the Jazz could make that work if they maybe through a sign and trade, and it's a great fit. They are paying Ingles and Gobert a lot of money, but Derek Favors is off the books this year. Slot him in with that lineup, and I think
and I mean, look at the defense there. Gobert is the best defensive player in the league, arguably, and then you've got one of the best two-way forwards to go along with one of the best young scorers to go along with one of the best three-point shooters. I mean, that's a great starting lineup right there.
and that's not even to mention
I
Ricky
agree with
Rubio
that.
flying off the
I'm
bench
glad
there.
that
Who had a
got to
great
hear
season
that.
last year.
I'm glad I got to hear that before I gave my response. I do think that the Jazz are a viable option. But I would love to see, I think they're a viable option, but I don't think they're a championship contender
I
anytime
think so.
soon. If ever, even against teams like the Warriors.
Well, talent-wise, I mean, okay, I think everybody realized that the Rockets outperformed last season, so now we think of the Rockets as almost same level as the Warriors. But if you look at straight talent, that Jazz team would be right about the same level as the Rockets. And
Well,
who knows if they could outperform.
Well, let's hear what do you think would be his best fit, Zach?
Well, obviously, I think any situation where he ends up with LeBron would be the best. And right now that's looking like LA. I just don't. Like what Brendan was saying about the Rockets outperforming or their expectations. I think that is not as likely to happen with that Jazz team. The Rockets could hit shots and they could hit threes at a very high level, and any team like that in today's league is going to be a powerhouse. And
Until they miss
I just don't see
27
the
straight.
Jazz being able to compensate with the players they have. So,
Well, Joe Ingles and
no, I don't. Okay.
and Paul George are great three-point shooters, and so
But-
is Donovan Mitchell.
Joe Ingles and it's a valid point. Joe Ingles is not Klay Thompson. Paul George is not Durant, and Donovan Mitchell is not Stephen Curry.
And Ben Simmons is not Donovan Mitchell. You're right.
Well,
Brendan,
speaking of Ben Simmons,
Brendan.
I know you're a huge fan of Donovan Mitchell, but I personally think that the best fit for Paul George is still the 76ers as far as basketball reasons. Uh, Los Angeles Lakers fantasies aside, um, if you slot Paul
As far
George
as
in there,
basketball,
yeah, if you slot Paul George in there for Robert Covington, um, I think the Sixers are by far they're an easy lock in the Eastern Conference. Um, they still
against
have
the
picks.
Celtics.
You got to yes against the Celtics, definitely against the Celtics actually, because Paul George would solve the problem that they had last year, which was what do you do when there's a team that can switch and sag off of Ben Simmons? Well, you give it to Paul George and make them actually have to play defense. You could bring an extra defender to close up that driving lane off of Covington. You can't do that with Paul George because even if he shows inconsistencies like he did with the Thunder last year, he's too much of a threat if he gets going to for you to take that chance. They would still be able to retain Redick and Fultz being the question mark that he is. I think that Fultz, because of this year that he's had to take, could evolve into a sort of James Harden with a Thunder role. I think that bringing him off the bench, he could be your sixth man who could be a superstar elsewhere. He's got that kind of potential. That was actually one of his biggest superstar comparisons coming out, and I think with that lineup potential, Paul George fits in honestly a lot better than LeBron does with Quinn Snyder, or not Quinn Snyder, Brett Brown coaching there. So I think the biggest question mark in free agency this year of the superstars is DeMarcus Cousins. He's sort of an unknown commodity because of his Achilles injury and just his generally sort of erratic personality.
Well, I don't think we should refer to anybody as a commodity.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. I agree. Players are people too. Um, but he's definitely a maximum level talent. But with the market for centers being down in the past few years, Cousins is in a really weird spot. He's been linked allegedly. He's been linked with the Lakers. He's been linked obviously back to the Pelicans, with the
Been linked
Mavericks.
with technical fouls.
Exactly. So with all those factors, all those mitigating factors, what do you guys think could be his most likely destination? Personally, I'm with the people who say he's going to end up at the Mavericks. That's a team that looks like they want to win now, and I'd say he does the 1 year. If he does 1 year, takes 20 million instead of the max, he's setting himself up for a nice long-term deal with the young, talented team.
Well, I don't
And
think he's getting much better,
Mavericks.
and I think he needs his money now. For him,
So where do you think he'd get that? Do you think there's anywhere that's willing to sign him to a long-term maximum deal coming
I
off
think
the Achilles
I
injury?
think for sure. I think there's no question. Actually, I think a team, one of the smaller teams, such as like the Magic, or like the Mavericks, or even if maybe the Lakers, if the Lakers don't, get any big guys this summer, one of those teams could sign him. I mean, I know the Lakers won't, but one of those smaller success teams of recent would be happy to overpay him. I mean, I think he is a max guy, but I think right now the market value of him is a little lower. So I think he will get that max contract, or he'll stay in New Orleans. I think it's either going to be a lower record team with a max, or stay in New Orleans with a lower contract.
Do you think he wants to go to a lower record team? Because he's, like you said, he's not getting any better. Zach,
I don't think he
what do you
cares
think?
enough about a championship.
Yeah, Zach, how do you feel about the possibility of him just saying, "I'll cash in while I can, forget my legacy"?
He definitely seems like that type of player, to be honest. From what I know about him, I'm not saying he's shallow. I just think, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like basketball is, or his basketball legacy is everything to him,
I think he's a soccer player.
like some other players. So yeah, I think money would be the first kind of
Hall of Fame
priority.
talent with a high school attitude. How about you,
Seems
Jake?
like
You got that
What's
Troy Green attitude.
what's his where do you think Cousins lands? Because it's just such a confusing and I think an interesting case.
I really like the idea of him going to Dallas, and I think that team would be really fun to watch and interesting because they just got Doncic and Dennis Smith, and then if you had a guy like DeMarcus Cousins, well, I'm not sure that I don't know if they would make the playoffs, but I still think they'd be like a fun team to watch. And I'm not sure that DeMarcus Cousins is really focused on winning as much as he is on getting paid. No, I like the idea of him going to Dallas.
Also
And I
with
think Dallas.
Dallas, you have Harrison Barnes, who's a borderline all-star as well. So
Yeah, Harrison Barnes, Wesley Matthews, Dennis Smith, Luka
Dennis Smith.
Doncic. That's if they are borderline playoff, who knows? Maybe they get lucky and they get a pick like Michael Porter next year, and all of a sudden you're like, you have to think about them being a legitimate team, a legitimate threat to be a top seed in the West. Oh, and just to clarify, when we make statements about players, we're going to acknowledge the fact that it's totally speculation. We don't actually know what someone like DeMarcus Cousins is thinking about or LeBron James is thinking about.
Yeah, so
We're
if
not
you're listening to us, DeMarcus, don't hate us.
exactly. We're not going to pretend that we're not going to pretend we know exactly what these guys are thinking about.
You know, and this is nothing against DeMarcus Cousins' game, because that boy's game is smooth like a Chick-fil-A peach milkshake.
All right, so the last individual free agent we're going to talk about is Isaiah Thomas. He's ranked 11 on Hoops Hype's list. He could probably go a little lower in my opinion, but you have to consider the fact that this guy just one season ago averaged 29.5 points a game, nearly led the league in scoring, and led the Boston Celtics to the first place record in the Eastern Conference. But obviously he didn't have such a great year this year. But I want to ask you guys, do you think that there's a team that'll gamble on him? Or what do you think his best option is as an individual as far as signing a contract? Do you think he wants to be a winner? Or do you think he wants to try and get paid? It's sort of like the Cousins question, because he's in a somewhat similar situation, though Cousins is definitely a more proven NBA player.
For IT4, I think he should try and find a team where he can have a similar role to the one he had on the Celtics. I don't know if there is a team. I've been trying to think of one. That would be a good fit, similar to that. And I can't. Y'all let me know if you can. But I just think the role Isaiah Thomas was in on that Celtics team was what made him so good. He's a great player, but you have to keep in mind he's 5'9" in a league where the average player is 6'7", and it requires a certain system to get his skills to be put on display, especially at such a high level as they were a season
So what you're
ago.
saying
So,
is he needs to be coached by Brad Stevens again.
basically.
So if unless the Celtics shock the world and trade Brad Stevens, you wouldn't be taking the chance on Isaiah Thomas if it were you.
I would not. I think he has a pretty large ego, and because he knows how good he is, and he does not bring, unless he's getting the kind of touches and attention that he got in Boston a year ago, I don't think he would be a very good asset to anyone's team for the amount of money they'd have to pay. So.
I pretty much agree as far as Isaiah Thomas's what's likely to happen with him. I don't think anyone's going to take the chance on him, and I think that's because most teams have a similar opinion to me, though. Maybe not so much Zach. I don't think that Isaiah Thomas will ever see that Isaiah Thomas from Boston again. I think he's more of a Lou Williams type player. You're elite six-man scorer only, no defense required. He didn't show great effort, in my opinion, when he was called on to play defense with the Cavs and the Lakers this past season. And I think that his ego has outgrown his talent. I understand having a chip on your shoulder. It's a great motivating factor for players who feel like they're at a disadvantage or have lower expectations. But at a certain point, you have to realize your limitations as a player, and because I don't feel like he does, he will ask for more money than he's worth, and may even sacrifice playing for a contender in order to get the money he feels like he deserves. What I think a smart player would do right now, as far as business, would sign with a contender for cheap, and then let all the offers roll in next offseason when he outplays his contract. But I don't think that's what he's gonna do.
Yeah, no, personally, to me, Isaiah Thomas is the kind of player that needs someone to stroke his ego enough for him to actually reach his potential. With the Celtics, he was able to start and be the man, and so he was actually able to do the things he's able to do. But the moment he's becoming a sixth man, his ego is just too big. He doesn't want to accept that role, and he doesn't give his full potential. I was watching TV the other day, and there was something on like Family Feud, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm about to get swept like the Cavs," and it's like, Isaiah,
That's
you were the
Family Feud?
reason that. Yeah.
That was Jimmy Kimmel, Brendan. I mean, I understand your mistake. Jimmy Kimmel and Steve Harvey look just alike, but
I don't know. I thought it was Family Feud, but
that was
yeah.
generation
Anyways.
gap. But yeah, same thing.
But anyways, I mean, they traded him for a bag of Doritos and a couple, cups of soda. So I really don't think he has any place to say that, especially since they would have been swept even quicker, maybe 3 games if he had been on the Cavs during the finals. So. But contrary to Justin and Zach's point, I think somebody will take the chance on him and overpay him, and then he'll just underperform. But it's possible one of these low teams with no talent whatsoever will give him the reins, and maybe he'll have some success again. But it looks like it's going to be a roller coaster ride for the rest of his life, where you get a chance, overperform, get signed by a good team, underperform, and then rinse or repeat.
The rest of his life or the rest of his career?
Ball
I
is
think it's the
life.
same thing. I mean, that's low man syndrome. That's how it is. It for.
How about you, Jake? I know that you sympathize with the small guy in the NBA. How do you feel about Isaiah Thomas this offseason?
Well, I think that he should join one of the lower team or less talented teams in the East, and that way they could probably give him a decent amount of money and he could still get some playing time, more than he would on any good team, and that way he can still be the great player that he thinks he is, and the team isn't really losing that much. Like, the team that signs him isn't really going to be losing that much because they're not in a position to where they're trying to win anyway.
Just for context, Jake, how tall are you?
I'm about 5'9".
That's a lie. He's 5'4".
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
a lot.
he's not 5'9".
Well, before we close out on this Isaiah Thomas stuff, I just want to point out that y'all seem to have a very low opinion of his abilities, but no average player averages 29.5 points a game
Yeah.
for a
What did
whole
he average
season
last season, Zach?
in the NBA.
All right, one of the less talked about, but maybe more interesting dynamics that you have to deal with every year is the restricted free agent deals for rookies who haven't quite earned that big time extension that they wanted. Bad teams often threaten to overpay for players who aren't so talented, and when you look at it, you could either end up with the Wizards and Otto Porter, who gave him the max, and I think he's really lived up to that, at least in the role they expected him to play. Or you could be like the Knicks and get Tim Hardaway, who has done the total opposite, and for at least for long stretches last season,
I
fell
would
off the face
disagree
of
with
the
that.
earth. What'd you say, Brendan?
I said I would disagree with that. I think Tim Hardaway had a breakout year.
This year?
Yeah, he was the second best player on the Knicks.
I think you're
Stat
proving
check,
my
baby.
point right there by saying he's the second best player on the Knicks.
Well, the Porzingis, I mean,
Yeah, but it's the Knicks. He had his breakout year with the Hawks the year before, maybe.
no, he didn't. He got his chance this year to start, and his stats went way up. On the Hawks, he underperformed. He came off the bench as a
Then
shooting
how do you
guard.
get such a big contract?
But the Knicks are known to overpay, so
Oh, well, we'll do a fact check on that later. But right, well, that's part of what makes restricted free agency so interesting. Teams, much like Brendan and I, disagree on the value of players. So who do you guys think will be the who do you guys think is one player who will be overpaid in free agency this year, and who do you think will be underpaid?
here, let me hit this first. I think Aaron Gordon from the Orlando Magic is somebody who's going to be very overpaid. Knowing the Magic, they're probably going to offer him close to a max deal. He's nowhere near that. I think he's really a 15 million a year kind of player. But he's going to get way more than that, and somebody's probably going to sign him. If the Magic don't sign him to close to a max, he's probably just going to leave. It's just a sorry situation because I really don't think he showed out. In this last season, he was pretty good, but I really don't see that worth. He's definitely going to be overpaid. Another player that might be underpaid, it depends on how you look at it. I'm not a big Mario Hezonja fan, but he did actually end the season this year pretty strongly. And I want to see if he actually gets re-signed, to maybe a minimum or something. He's always been very good in lower competition, which would make sense, obviously, but like during the Rising Stars games and during scrimmages and stuff like that, he seems to dominate. And then when he steps on the court, he doesn't do as much. So maybe he gets one more chance with somebody, and maybe gets a really small contract. Something to look for. So that's the Orlando Magic. But those are two guys I'm thinking.
You can tell he's a Magic fan because he talks about the Rising Stars game. What about you, Jake?
We have no
think,
All Stars, so
I think that a player who has a very high chance to get overpaid is Marcus Smart because I feel like Brad Stevens has made him look like a better player than he would be on most other teams just because of the system that Brad Stevens has. And he's not that good of a shooter, but he's a hustler and a good defender, and I think that a team is going to give him a lot more money than he's worth.
I was gonna ask you a question, Jake. I know how LeBron is Kyrie's dad. Well, do you think Brad Stevens is Marcus Smart's dad?
No.
Jake says no comment. Jake, who do you think? Do you think that the Celtics will be the ones to overpay Marcus Smart? Do you think they're the only team that would be willing to give him the estimated $12 million a year?
I don't think the Celtics are going to be the ones to overpay him. I think they're likely going to let him walk if another team offers him a lot of money because, again, I think Brad Stevens can get similar production out of a player that they don't have to pay as much.
My pick for most overpaid is definitely Alfred Payton because if he gets paid next year, he's being overpaid. But no, seriously, in terms of who I think is going to get overpaid, I definitely think a team is going to overpay Rodney Hood. I do like him as a player. I like his skill set. But I just think the effect of playoff and finals performances on the perception of a player is more than it should be. And after seeing how he played once he finally got a chance to in this finals, I think some GM somewhere is gonna jump on that. And
How about underpaid?
in terms of an underpaid player, I think Zach LaVine's gonna get underpaid.
Just in terms of it, yeah.
obviously coming from an injury, we don't know how well he's going to be playing, but
Well, he's played since the injury, and he played all right.
he has played since the injury, and he did play all right.
Actually, I agree with the Zach LaVine pick. I think that he showed flashes of being a high-level scorer in Minnesota, and even though his athleticism isn't quite where it was before the injury, he's a really talented player. But that injury is going to keep him from getting the money he truly deserves.
Well,
Um,
much like Justin just said, I like to think of Zach LaVine as like a flasher. Like that's like the kind of player I like to think of him as.
Slasher?
Like, yeah, he's a flasher. He's a flasher. He has like
Slasher.
flashes of like greatness
Oh,
during like
that's what you
games
mean.
and stuff. Yeah, and like to me, he's a flasher because like he'll come out every once every 2-3 games and really perform like an all-star. And seeing his growth over the last 3 years to just from a pure dunker to like a great player, or a very good player at least, is very encouraging. And now you can kind of play him at the shooting guard now that Chris Dunn can play point guard. So I think his value is actually going really high up.
But and definitely more than he'll get paid. As far as overpaid players, personally, I'm gonna go with Randall, Julius Randall. I feel like he doesn't, even though he had good numbers near the end of the season last year, I don't quite see where he fits in the modern NBA. He's a little too short to be a true power forward, though he rebounds well for his size. He sort of got this. He reminds me of a bowling ball when he goes down the court. He's sort of out of control. He manages to finish sometimes, but he doesn't shoot well enough to be a real threat in the half-court offense. And at 6'7", that doesn't cut it anymore. But I do feel like the little flashes he showed on an undermanned Lakers team this season will convince some guys, some GM to pick him up. Maybe the Mavericks. I feel like their front office is smarter than that. But if they somehow miss out on Cousins, Capella, and DeAndre Jordan, they might feel a little desperate. And I think that's a team that'd be willing to take a chance on him. I think the Kings are a team that might do it as well, just because they're known for making silly moves. But the last restricted free agent I want to ask about is Fred VanVleet.
I think that Fred VanVleet, no matter how much money he gets, will not be enough because of the value that he brings to a team, a franchise, a city, a culture. He here was able to lead one of the best
That's good
in
culture.
the history of the National Basketball Association. And his defense and his shooting, something that every NBA team wants. So he's definitely going to get underpaid.
Yeah. This segment has been brought to you by Skip Bayless. Each year, we end up getting surprised by some free agent who outperforms their contract, signs maybe a one-year deal, even a minimum deal, and just plays so much better than everyone expects them to. Oftentimes it's a player who showed flashes before but got injured or just could never quite live up to their potential after their first rookie or sophomore campaign. I think the best example of this year, actually there were two decent examples on the Grizzlies. Tyreek Evans and JaMychal Green both really showed up this year and did much better than people expected. So who do you guys think will be the big free agency steal, or who do you guys think has the potential to be a big free agency steal this offseason? All right, Brendan, why don't you kick us off for this one?
I think Tyson Chandler is the big name to me, honestly. I think he's a
What?
great veteran. I think he brings a lot of things to the table.
Brendan, when you have a real answer, I'll come back to you. How about you,
let me
Jake?
tell you right now that Tyson Chandler was an all-star and actually played great minutes for a long point of his career, even when he was older. And I think right now he can contribute to any team actually with leadership. And on the Warriors, he might even start. So that is a real answer.
You
How
you really
many
think the
times was he an
Warriors?
All-Star?
One, but I mean, still that's still good. And he was an All-Star, and he was 31 when he was an All-Star. So I mean, he was older, so he still has that ability today.
It's an all-star center. Okay, I mean,
He also put up a
Jake.
lot of good numbers for the Suns. He just was always injured.
So do you think, why would the Warriors, who with their injury issues, take the chance on Chandler if
Well,
they
because
need a rim
Pachulia helps
protector?
them cause injury, so they need somebody to actually be injured. I
Offset
think they
that.
need to balance that off. Yeah.
Okay, that proves how serious the answer was there. Jake, who do you have as your sleeper free agent?
I think that my sleeper free agent is Gerald Green. He's someone who was able to give good minutes off the bench for Houston this season and was a great part of their scoring and shooting off the bench. And I think that he can also, that role that he had on Houston can be a valuable role to a bunch of other teams in the league. And I think someone's going to pay little money but still get good value out of him.
Yeah, he's kind of like a J.R. Smith type player, but Houston used him so much more sparingly than Smith, so he didn't have a chance to make
J.R. Green.
those huge mistakes. Zach, you got anything?
Well, I was thinking exactly what Jake was thinking, so he kind of took my answer. So not really.
Okay, kind of putting me on the spot here to provide, but I think I'm gonna say Jeremy Grant. While I think it's pretty likely that the Thunder re-sign him, I think that Jeremy Grant has shown in the time that he's gotten to play that he's a versatile player. He's very athletic, and he's a good shot blocker. I think he's got the potential to be an elite role player, which is what most of these sleeper free agents end up being. If he can hit threes at even like a 35% at 35% next season, I think that I really believe actually that I believe that he can do that. He'll be one of the best free agent pickups at a low price. Well, that concludes episode 2 of the 3&D podcast. Hope you guys like the name. Uh, we're trying to keep these under 30 minutes. We might have gone a little over. Haven't quite finished editing yet, but I think we might have gone a little over this time, but generally it'll stay under half an hour. I looked at the feedback you guys gave me about the background footage, and I've decided, at least for now, especially when we're going to be switching between players so quickly, that practice is the best way to for me to be able to put something on in the background without being too distracted by actually having to play the game. For this episode, I'm wondering, what do you guys? Someone suggested musical transitions. So, what do you guys think of that idea between topics, putting a little transition music? I think it's cool, but would take a little more editing on my part. But I'm willing to learn how to do that in order to improve the quality of these videos. Also, do check out our social media. I'm gonna get the links to those up at the end of this video, and I'm also thinking of including not just bloopers and outtakes, but a fact check, because we know that we're gonna say some false numbers or some wrong numbers occasionally. So I figure I'm gonna post a video where we go back and every few episodes. This won't be every episode, where we go through some of the numbers that we may have gotten wrong, because I think it's a little funny to see what we think about that thing and maybe sort out some arguments we have during the show. That's all, so adios.